recording. And so we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome to our summer training series. We are really excited to be bringing this and having this discussion together and kind of learning together over the next several weeks. We did work with the Casey Family Foundation and the National Association of Social Workers to learn this curriculum and to be able to bring this curriculum. We've made some adaptations to the curriculum as written to make sense for some Ohio specific things, but mostly it's really based on science and based on research. And we're really going to be focusing on how to improve and grow our work with teenagers and kind of using what we know about child development and brain development to inform and guide the work that we do with teens, particularly creating situations where we can help teens effectively plan for the future and having some of those critical conversations. So for those of you that don't know me, I am Jenny with the Athens CASA program in Athens County. I've been with CASA for almost 8 years. Prior to that, I worked in child protection. I specifically worked as an ongoing caseworker, and I also worked for a number of years as our county's sexual assault investigator and forensic interviewer. So I'm a licensed social worker. My background is in social work and psychology. I've also previously worked in a domestic violence shelter. And a lot of my graduate work was kind of focusing on how to improve outcomes for teens. A lot of my advocacy work, policy level advocacy work, is around improving outcomes for older youth and teens, and specifically looking at that delicate intersection of policy, practice, and research. So I was really excited to see this training and this curriculum be developed somewhat in the heart of that intersection. So so I'd want to hear who all of you are, and we're going to be spending the next several weeks learning together. And I know we already started kind of a baby introduction on Google, but I'm interested in just kind of going around the Zoom room and asking everyone to introduce themselves quickly, kind of just share to keep it concise, let's do name, where you're from, and if you had to describe the kind of day you're having using only a color, give us the color that you would use. So I'll go through my screen. I'm going to start with Nancy.
Hi, I'm Nancy Cooper. I am from Athens, Ohio, and I would say blue, but that's a good thing.
Okay.
Not in terms of having the blues, but blue being.
Great, thanks, Nancy. Next on my screen is Betty.
I'm Betty Bowe. I am a CASA in Athens County. I live in Guysville, out in the country. Goodness, my color. Well, yesterday it was black with a storm, but today it's green.
Great. And how about Julie is next on I'll just work through my screen tiles.
I'm Julie Cohenauer. I'm from Athens County, and I would say the color is yellow today for sunshine.
Great, thanks, Julie. We need some yellow, need some sunshine. Next, I have Debbie. Debbie, not Deb. So we'll go with Debbie first. Debbie Huff.
I'm Debbie Huff from Preble County, and I would say my color is like a grayish blue. It's turning blue right now.
Great, thank you. All right, and next I have Keith.
Hi, I'm Keith Jepson. I'm actually live in Michigan, just north of Toledo, Ohio. So I work for the Toledo CASA office. I suppose the kind of base is just kind of a plain, everyday, ordinary day.
Great, thank you, Keith. Next I have Sarah. Sarah Grace.
Hello, I'm Sarah Grace, and I'm from Athens. So I work with the Athens County CASA. And I would say it's kind of gray, but gray is actually one of my favorite colors because it's so versatile. And it's a day to get a lot of things done.
Great, perfect, great. Next is Kara.
Hi, everybody. My name's Kara. I grew up in the Plains, Ohio. I live in Athens now, and I'm feeling Kelly green today.
Nice. I love the specificity. Next is Deb Murray.
I am sitting outside, so I have to say my day is going to be green because I'm looking at everything green and the pond is even kind of green.
Great. Thanks, Deb. Glad to have you. Next, I have Ashley Walterbush.
Hi, Ashley from Ottawa County. My color is purple.
Great, thanks. Next, it just says B's iPhone.
Oh, I'm sorry. I need to fix that. I'm Alicia Billman, and my color is yellow, and I'm also in Athens County.
Great. Thanks, Alicia. And then I have Frankie, it says.
Hi, I'm Frankie Logan. I'm in Toledo, Ohio, and I would describe my day as yellow.
Great. Glad to have you on board. Thanks for joining. Next, I have Rochelle down in Meigs County.
Hi, I'm Rochelle Jose. I live in Athens, but I'm with the Meigs County CASA. And I'd say my color is blue today because I got flooded out of work. So still in my pajamas.
Okay. Yeah, we were lamenting about the flooding down. I think Rochelle, you and me and Betty all kind of lived down in a similar neck of the woods and had extensive flooding. Next up is Tanya. We are introducing ourselves, saying who you are, where you're from, and if you had to describe how you're feeling today in a color, what color would it be?
My name is Tanya Farley, and I am a Clinton County CASA and also a Warren County CPS worker. And I think my color is yellow today. It's just so sunny and it's so happy to see the sun, and it's just bright.
Great. Well, thank you for joining. Few just general reminders before we get started. Originally this curriculum, if I had chosen, had my way with making the decisions about the pandemic, and if we could wish away all of the concerns we've had over the past year and a half related to the coronavirus, my dream would be to have this curriculum, and the original plan was to do like an intensive weekend where we'd go somewhere cool, like a state park, and stay, and we'd just have 2 full days of like training. So we still might be able to do that maybe next summer or the summer after, but a certain virus had different ideas about how training would happen this past year or so. So we've spent a bit of time this spring reworking this so that we would still be able to do it. We do have support through the Ohio CASA Association, through our local nonprofit, the Friends of CASA, as well as NASW and Casey Family Foundation to bring this training forward. So we're excited to be able to do it. You all are kind of our pilot in implementing this training, but my hope is that it can become an annual like building experience that we can continue to just grow our work and grow our practice when it comes to working with older youth and teens. So much of our policy and energy in Ohio focuses on younger youth in care and younger children in care. So it makes my heart happy to see this emphasis on some of the working on how we can improve outcomes for older youth. A few notes: we will be meeting every Tuesday for the next 12 weeks to get in all of the live sessions. This is eligible for 12 hours of Rule 48 approved CASA GIL credit. And so I mentioned earlier, if you are going to miss a session, please let us know about that ahead of time. And we do record the sessions. We record them, but I do stress the importance of tuning in every Tuesday, because a lot of our work together is discussion based. So I'm learning alongside of you. This isn't a training where, I'm the all-knowing expert and all of you are just here to absorb my knowledge. We're going to be learning as a group and working through these things. So, But again, sometimes life happens, or you're traveling, or something happens at work, and if you need to catch the recording, there is a makeup form that you can do can still receive credit for the session that you missed. And we're not doing like, I don't have the capacity to give partial credit to kind of say, oh, you did 10 hours or 12 hours. It's kind of all or nothing. I do know that some of you have talked to your local program directors about any modifications to that. So just so you know, I will open the Zoom at 10 till 12 every Tuesday. So if you're someone who likes to log in early, or you have worry that the technology is going to fail and you want to log in early, I will be here at 10 till every Tuesday, but we will try to start promptly at 12 because we do have a lot to cover, especially as we move into some of those later modules. Also, we do ask if it's possible and you're comfortable, we do ask for you to leave your camera on. I know sometimes there are reasons that you're not going to do that, or you have to stop, have to turn it off for a moment, or maybe don't even have a camera capabilities. But just because we are going to be engaging with each other, I'm definitely not going to say it's required or anything like that, but if possible, if you can leave it on, we do appreciate that, so that we know everyone is engaged and participating. There will be times we won't use it today, but we will use breakout features in future sessions. So there will be opportunities for you to work in small groups and work through things. The Google Classroom is simply just to house all of our materials. There are some pre-questions on there that I already put up there. It was just more to kind of get us thinking and get us working together. We're going to discuss some of those questions today as a group. We also, if you see something that says pre-question, it's pretty obvious that that's something to think about before you come, just to get in the right state of mind, right? Think about kind of the topic for the day. And then I will also share any handouts on there just so you have access to them, and we try to make it sure that you have them in a variety of formats. And then every once in a while, there will be a reflection question posted. So reflection questions are meant to be answered after our session together. So, it'll be pretty obvious to you along the way. And we'll be discussing those on an ongoing basis. But the reflection questions are really to help anchor our conversation. So those are useful. Any initial questions, trouble with Google Classroom, anything like that we need to address before we begin? Okay. And as a reminder, if you're not talking, I might mute you if there's background noise. Doesn't mean I don't want to hear from anybody. Feel free to stop me at any time. If you have a question or have something to add to the conversation, you're also welcome to use the chat feature. I know some of you have already been using the chat feature, so that's great too. But if you're putting something in the chat and it's not catching my attention, please stop and interrupt me, because this curriculum is really designed to be based on us having conversations with each other. These sessions, because they are recorded and have the potential to be shared later on, I do just make note of that for you. I know all of you are, work with children in some capacity, most of you through CASA. So keeping that in mind when you're asking questions, or if you're sharing any kind of stories, that really this is not a confidential or necessarily a private session, because the recording could be shared later on. So if you do have very specific questions, or something a little more specific to a case that you're working on, or a specific child, let's connect offline, or I can stay on one day and talk a little bit more about that. But just being mindful of confidentiality and of families' privacy when we are engaging in conversation. But I do want this to be a safe and respectful space for us to have those open dialogues, but just kind of keeping in mind that this is going to be recorded and could potentially be viewed later on. And keeping that in mind, if we do venture into maybe we're getting really too case specific, I might just kind of, move us on. And that's just in an effort to protect that confidentiality. So, all right, let's get started. So to start with today, just so that you all have access to the competencies, what we're expecting to cover during our 12 weeks together. We are going to be talking a lot about trauma and how that impacts development and using that as a lens. And there will be times when we're having discussions that part of my job is to push that trauma lens perspective. And so there are times I might be that person, asking those difficult or provocative questions. So we'll work through those moments together. We're going to lean into that and work through that together. We're going to be talking a lot about how our worldview or others' worldview maybe impacts our work sometimes. I might have skipped a competency. Yeah, we're going to be challenging a lot of our own beliefs, our own preconceived notions. I can't tell you the number of times that people say, oh gosh, teenagers, whew, they're a tough one. And a lot of times that's meant in jest and that's meant in a very lighthearted way. But sometimes, even the most subtle of conversations has a way of impacting the way that we work. So we're going to work through those things together and have a little bit of fun in thinking of new ways to talk about families or to talk to families. And then these are also available on Google Classroom. That's why I'm not going to read them all to you. But our hope is when you finish this 12-week series with us, you'll feel a lot more comfortable thinking about and helping youth with transition outcomes. So thinking about older youth as they're transitioning from foster care or from wherever they are into adulthood. My hope is that you'll walk away from this training series feeling a lot more comfortable incorporating the general knowledge about brain development into recommendations that you make for children. And again, we're going to be talking about all kinds of trauma. And then here's just the rest of the learning objectives that I very much hope to cover during our time together. One final piece that I want us all to keep in mind, some of you have worked with me pretty closely over the years, so you've heard me talk about this, but really taking responsibility for our own expectations when we're working with older youth and teens and practicing that throughout this training series. One thing that I'm particularly, bothered by, I'll be quite direct about it, is the use of coded language when we're working with older youth and teens. And you can probably think of in your work with CASA or in your work with children in other capacities, this subtle transition that happens when a child is younger, and then suddenly they become kind of this preteen or this adolescent, and then eventually a teenager. And the way in which we describe them changes. The words that we use change. It's not often that I've heard a 4-year-old be called manipulative, but I've certainly heard a lot of 15-year-olds be called manipulative, even though both of those children have experienced similar traumas. And we can probably guess that their behavior, right, is a reaction to that trauma and kind of to their experiences. So we're going to be taking care to just think about the words that we use, because when we use those words, it subtly has a way of impacting our professional response to it. One that bothers me in particular is if a teenager runs away, like leaves a foster home for some reason without permission. We tend to call that in the child welfare circle, we tend to call that AWOL. Absent without leave, like the military term, we call that AWOL. And my concern with that particular terminology is that AWOL is a breaking of the rules, right? We're automatically assuming kind of delinquency or criminal intent or something like that. And it has this subtle way of affecting how the professionals react in that situation, right? Maybe less likely to consider, other alternative hypotheses for why that child is missing or why they've left that home or run away. And we kind of put that responsibility on the child. And it just has a way of impacting, right? Kind of the steps that happen after that. So really being careful to kind of, say what we mean and use the words very deliberately when we're talking about teens and about older youth in foster care. So we'll have lots of time to work through that, but those are kind of my expectations, and I hope that it will come to align with your expectations as well for this session. So we're going to keep it pretty light this time. And these questions some of you have already seen and answered, thank you. But I would love to just kind of go around the virtual room and hear from all of you. And we can just kind of popcorn back and forth. So if someone wants to be the brave first person to share, what is a strength that you have when you're working with young people?
I'll share. This is Frankie.
Great, thank you, Frankie.
I wrote down that I meet the teens where they are. And what I meant by that was I didn't expect my teen who'd been trafficked for 12 years to act like my daughter, you know, who's had a very stable, sheltered upbringing. So wherever they are, that's where I meet them.
Great. Yeah, thanks. That's an important skill to have, because sometimes, right, we're the helpers, we're the grown-ups who know better, and we're the helpers. So we want to swoop in and kind of get young people on this track that we think they should be on. So that's a great skill and great strength to have, is to be able to just be comfortable kind of starting where they are. Great. Thank you for sharing, Frankie. Who else would like to share?
I'm Alicia, and I would say that my strength is in active listening.
Great, thank you. That's a great skill to have with any age group, but particularly with teens. And for those of you that have worked with young adults or teens, they can call you on it when you're not genuine, right? They can see right through it when you're not being genuine with that. So that's a great skill to practice and great skill to have. Thank you.
This is Keith. I feel like I have a lot of patience. You know, I've raised 2 kids myself, and you realize that they learn at different levels than you do. And sometimes you just have to slow down and try to take things at their level and not at your own level.
Yeah, absolutely. Good advice. Who else?
I like to recognize that each child is an individual, that it's not a one size fits all. And I like to listen to what they have to say without any judgment or expectations of what I want. Just listen to what it is they have to say, what their hopes and their dreams are.
Yeah, that's a great point of, you know, so many times we enter into conversations with children of any age, but I think especially older youth and teens, with our own expectations. And so kind of slowing down and giving up that space is a great strength. Thanks, Julie, for sharing.
I think mine goes along with a lot of the other responses, but I like to foster a lot of respect when I'm working with children any age, just kind of provide them with opportunities to practice a bit of independence and being the drivers of their lives and have a lot of input.
Yeah, you know, I think sometimes I often say that CASAs are the advocates for joy. I think that's one of our jobs that is not in the job description, but we end up kind of advocating for joy. But I also think Kara touches on an important point about just basic human dignity and advocating to have that be restored or maybe offered for the very first time with everyone that we work with, you know, regardless of how old they are. Anyone else want to share?
I'll share. This is Rochelle. I think that I have a strength of building just a positive rapport with students and also, you know, my CASA teens or younger kids, because I like to help them work through their issues or their problems and see things from different sides, but in a non-judgmental way. And just being positive and being able to congratulate them when they do reach a success.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you know, for those of you that have done any kind of trauma-informed care work, we often ask, you know, it's a pretty standard trauma training question to kind of say, oh, when things aren't going well, you know, who are the people you've been able to rely on in your life in the past? That's a kind of a pretty standard line of questioning. And you know, the other piece of that doesn't get taught as much or practiced as much is when things are going really well, right? Who do you call with the good news? Who are those people in your life? And I think particularly that's kind of what Rochelle's alluding to is we need support, 360 degrees of support in our lives. Great. Oh, yep, Julie, thanks for adding that to the chat, kind of, encouraging children and teens to self-advocate, right? Kind of, giving them that space and those tools, and even, kind of helping hold the microphone for them, right? To make sure that they're being heard. Yeah, some of you have heard me talk about this, especially the Athens County volunteers will have heard me say this, but when I started with CASA, the CASA slogan was voice of the child, like CASA is the voice of the child. And I always resisted that a little bit because it was often interpreted as CASA is the voice of the child, implying that children don't have a voice, which I've always resisted and kind of said, well, they have a voice. It's just been ignored for a long time. So I think CASA makes sure that the voice of the child is heard. So I always kind of resisted that language a little bit because it kind of gave this impression that we're speaking for the children when really we're kind of wanting to make sure that what the children have to say is being listened to. Just a subtle semantics, but subtle difference. Great. Well, thank you everyone for sharing. So now let's talk about challenges. What is one challenge that you anticipate or that you have when working with young people? And this could be a challenge that you experience as the person working and supporting, or just kind of a system barrier. Like I mentioned, the use of language. I think that's a challenge for all of us when we're working with young people because we have this system that uses this terminology and language. But then, a challenge for me might be that because of the nature of my work, sometimes that changes the way that I can work with. So whatever it is, it can be personal or it can be system related. So what is one challenge that you have?
This is Nancy. In my experience with the 3 teens I've worked with, all 3 ended up regretting that they were in the system because it changed their life so drastically. Had to change schools, couldn't learn to drive, couldn't go to prom, couldn't mow the grass. There just seemed to be a lot of barriers to normalcy for teens in foster care. Yeah,
no, that's an excellent point, and one that we hear a lot, in the work with youth advisory boards, and when we hear that kind of feedback. So thanks for sharing, Nancy. Rochelle, I see your hand up.
Sometimes I'm going to speak a lot about my students, but also the kids that I work with in CASA. When I speak of my own experience, I work with 14 to 18-year-olds as students and then CASA. I think some of it would be the apathy that I've run into within the last couple of years, or seeming to have apathy. Sometimes I think it's just the trauma response, but it's kind of disguised as that apathy, I would say.
Yeah, no, thanks for sharing. I think that's a pretty common experience these days. Keith shared in the chat box that sometimes having a hard time relating to what children are going through because their lives and experiences are so different from mine. Yeah, I think a lot of us probably feel that way. Or on the other side of that continuum, some of us on this call might have very similar experiences to the children that we serve, and that can also sometimes create a little bit of a stumbling block for us as we navigate those things. So that's a great point. Anyone else want to share a challenge?
I think this is Frankie. I think sometimes it's a challenge working with foster parents who have teens, who don't understand what some typical things may be. And, just putting your thumb down on the kid is just not the way to go. And then working with the worker of the foster parent, the county worker of the foster parent.
Yeah, that's a great point. And thanks for sharing, Frankie. I've actually been with our Children's Services Agency working through with children who have been in care for a really long time and have maybe experienced some moves in placements. and looking through the way in which we describe those teens or those children when we're looking for like a future placement for them is so often those descriptions and those narratives about children are written from the lens of the caregiver's fatigue, right? The caregiver or the caseworker's fatigue because of those, working with those children daily and caring for them daily, right? It lends itself to caregiver fatigue. So a lot of the way that we describe those children are written through that lens. And so I think that that's an excellent point that you bring up, is that, it's easy for us as the CASA to kind of come in and have this different perspective than the foster parent or whoever cares for that child on a daily basis, and might be feeling frustrated and worn out, maybe burned out a little bit from kind of managing those challenging behaviors, or kind of whatever it is that's kind of causing is leading to that stress. And so whenever I kind of get told, well, it's easy for you to only talk about the positive parts of this child because you're not here every day. And that's exactly why people like CASA exist, is because, meant to come from that perspective of making sure that we're looking at this situation from all directions. So great points. Sarah shared in the chat, oh, she's in the office right now. Challenging when you encounter the people who have a preconceived idea that teens are inclined to bad behavior. Yep, absolutely. And then and I think that caregiver fatigue, all of those things can influence that. And sometimes we as a society tend to think of teens and foster care a little bit differently than how we think of younger children in foster care. Even in the way we talk about those stories of resilience that we all hear about, how someone kind of overcame all of this and then was successful later on in life. We even tell those from a lens of kind of this child could, or this teen or this young person could have been on a different path, but somewhere along the way these decisions were made. And so that's a lot to unpack. That's pretty complicated, but yeah, thanks for sharing that, Sarah. Julie shares, children think because I'm older that I can't relate or understand their perspective. Absolutely. And I think that happens a lot. And even just owning that and asking them to educate you. I always kind of tell kids, you're right, I don't really know what you're talking about, so teach me, you become the teacher and kind of help me understand. Having a hard time figuring out what older kids are into music, music, all that kind of stuff, trying to sleuth out and create some common ground. This isn't related to CASA, but I volunteer with the Make-A-Wish Foundation just in my free time. And I have a child that I've been assigned to volunteer with and work with, and he called me out pretty quickly on my lack of Marvel, the universe, like the superhero movies, my lack of knowledge about those things. So I'm doing some research before I go and meet with him again, so that I can be properly vetted and prepared for my conversation about these superheroes and villains, because I want to be confident in my conversation. So it is hard to kind of keep up with that, but I think don't fake it, right? You just got to own it. Alicia shares distrust of the system, particularly when the system kind of contributes to the trauma, right? Sometimes our intervention creates those traumatizing experiences. It's one of the unintentional consequences, I think, of the magnitude of the intervention that is sometimes required to keep children safe. Absolutely. Great. Oh, thanks, Keith. I will call in an expert if I need some help and learn. I'm learning. All right. So we've already talked on, I think some of the burning issues we've already talked about as we've talked about through some of these challenges. And I can tell you that a lot of them that we've talked about, we're going to wrestle with over the next 12 weeks together, and will be points of discussion together. But are there any other kind of burning issues that, that one thing that really motivated you to sign up for this training, or something you're hoping to work through together? Anyone have a burning issue? It's also okay to say, Jenny, I just needed the 12 hours of credit, and that's why I signed up for this training. It's totally okay too. So now, and some of you have already shared this, but I would like to go around the room, the Zoom room, and hear from each of you on one strategy that you've used to engage young people, particularly when you're planning for the future. And if you haven't had the opportunity to do this, an idea you have that might help a young person think constructively or think positively about the future. So if everyone could, think on that for a second, if anyone wants to go first, and then I'll just work my way around the room from whoever wants to start.
I can start. I usually just ask my teens, what does your family look like when this is all over? When we all go away, what does your picture look like? And we just kind of start from there and ask them about what kinds of things they think their family needs and what they need to feel safe and, where they want to be. And sometimes that's pretty, I found some success because when you listen, they will tell you exactly what they want, and they have a lot of opinions about how they're going to get there. And the longer they lived in these situations, the more ideals they have about what people around them need to be doing. So that's been a great conversation catalyst for me to just ask them, what do you want? What do you see for your future? How do we get there? Lead me.
Great. Yeah, that's a great strategy. And it kind of pulls in a lot of those aspects of, kind of restoring dignity and things like that, of kind of saying, what do you think? And what's the first step for us to get there? Thanks for sharing, Tanya. Anyone want to go next?
This is Frankie. I'll go next.
Great. Thanks, Frankie.
I've had all of my kids so far have been teens, and I've been amazed that they're not told about the Bridges program. So I always bring it up. Starting probably in through junior year, we start talking about it because it's information that most of them, they're just shocked by, and who knows how long that'll be available, but it's a key program.
Yeah, great. Is everyone familiar with Bridges?
No.
Here, does anyone need a?
I'm only vaguely familiar.
I'm not familiar.
Okay, great. So Bridges is an Ohio program. Actually, other states have it too, but Bridges is the name for the Ohio program that is meant to extend supportive services past age 18. And it can look a few different ways for some, and there are some accountability measures. So it is, there is a court procedure for a child or for a teen or a new adult who just turned 18 to remain, and sometimes they can remain in care while they're, maybe finishing school or preparing for college, things like that. Sometimes we've also had young adults who have, through Bridges, have gotten support to get independent housing, and they're getting job training, getting their first job, going to college, things like that. And there's some financial support and community support in that work. It's fairly recent in the world of child welfare here in Ohio. And so in Southeastern Ohio, it's essentially regionalized. So there are groupings of counties together that kind of have a similar Bridges administrator. And so here in Athens County, for example, we've had maybe a couple dozen cases that have been filed here to increase support for Bridges, but it's happening more and more and more as providers, as CASAs, as supportive people out in the community are learning about Bridges and helping getting young people connected. But you can start doing the groundwork for Bridges, before someone turns 18. We don't have to wait for them to turn 18 to start thinking about it or looking into it. We can start some of that early work preparing for that once we know that that's going to be the child's plan. But it also creates, there are some accountability measures. There are, requirements for education or for vocation and for support, and, of course, all of those things. But the cool thing about Bridges that is a little bit new or is a little bit novel here in Ohio is that, a child might, or a young person, a young adult might leave and then return, and they can do that more than once. And so, if they kind of try on their own and it doesn't go very well, they can receive that support again, and then kind of get back on their feet and then try again, which of course is much more like what, you know, most 18 and 19-year-olds are, right? You know, there's a lot of support that is needed. So I'll add more information about it to the Google Classroom so that you all have in the specific procedures for each county, things like that, that if you do have a teen who might be interested or might benefit from Bridges, you'll know how to access that for them. Ashley shared in the chat, when thinking about career and educational future, liking to talk about their interest and then what their interest could lead to into a career. And you know, a lot of teens don't even know that their interests could lead to a career, right? If they're really interested in drawing things, they don't know that there are people whose job it is to be a graphic designer, for example. Yeah. You know, kind of advocating and even shedding some light on the possibilities for that young person is a pretty valuable thing. Rochelle shares, some teens are so focused on the present that they don't think towards the future because they are just trying to get through today. When she talks to teens, she tries to motivate them towards their interests and help them brainstorm ideas and ask questions. Most important thing is to show support because they sometimes don't get that outside of us. The support that they can, you know, really know that they can achieve their dreams. Yeah, absolutely. I always say CASA advocates for joy, but also those possibilities and having those conversations. You know, I can't tell you the number of teenagers that I've talked to if I've casually mentioned higher education or job training, that it's not occurred to them that could be a possibility for them. And so just even kind of having those conversations and just talking about it the way that we would with any child, right? With any teenager, having those kinds of conversations in a supportive, brainstorming, exploratory type way is a great tactic.
Hi, this is Keith. I just like to say I've learned that I need to be completely honest and not pull any punches with the kids. I mean, sometimes they'll ask hard questions about what's going to happen next, or why can't I see my mother, or why can't I do this or that. And I just, you know, they've been through it a lot already. There's no sense, you know, leaving their hopes up. You know, you want to be optimistic about things, but be honest and say, well, this is probably going to happen, and you can expect this, or this isn't going to happen because of the situation. Just tell them like it truly is.
Yeah, I think, you know, I definitely advocate for that, especially when we're talking about the court case, about the, you know, kind of the child welfare, the juvenile court cases. Obviously being trauma sensitive and developmentally sensitive, but being really honest and transparent with youth and teens about what's happening in their case. I'm a really big advocate for children and teens participating in their proceedings, participating in meetings and reviews, but having those kind of really frank conversations about, you know, what's happening, why is it happening, what do we think will happen next? Because particularly with teens, if they're constantly told by the adults and the professionals in their lives of, well, it's complicated, which is just our grown-up way of saying, I don't really know how to talk to you about this, so I'm just going to say it's complicated to avoid this conversation. And really talking through that of, you know, what is complicated about it, why, you know, what are the possibilities here, and being really honest about that. That's definitely been my approach as a caseworker, and then now as CASA, is being really just kind of upfront and honest with the people that I'm working with about what to expect, what they can expect from me, what I expect of them, those types of things. Yeah, great point. And I mean, particularly teenagers, you know, a lot of teens that we're working with, they're kind of figuring out and developing their own emotional intelligence. And so they're getting to a point where they can, you know, sense when you're not being authentic with them or when you're holding something back. Sarah, great point here, reminding teens that it's absolutely okay not to know what they want to do for the rest of their lives. Absolutely. Kind of, you know, the thought that they should be able to visualize their entire adult life can be really daunting. So I tell them it's okay to go for something knowing that they can change direction later. Absolutely. I think of that, especially when I think of the way we've approached higher education over the last 10 to 20 years is how it's kind of, hey, you're in 7th grade, it's time to figure out what your major is going to be. And that can seem like you get on this path and, you know, that's a lot of pressure. Julie shares using transition training to help students get job experience, helping them to learn to live on their own, know where to get support. Yeah. Encouraging the child to advocate for the life that they want to pursue, kind of, is this what you want for yourself? Is this kind of track that we're on right now what you had in mind? Absolutely. Great. Anyone else want to share a great strategy? I'm having trouble transitioning my slides here. All right. So as we start to wrap up our first session today and kind of look forward and plan for the next few months, thank you all, first of all, for contributing and participating in the discussion. It truly is better when we're all sharing ideas. And I hope that you'll kind of grab a notebook or something and keep, be able to jot down ideas or even phrases that people use. Feel like, oh gosh, I love the way that Sarah worded that, or I love the way that Tanya, mentioned how she talks to teens or opens those conversations, so that we can kind of keep building on that skill set over the next 12 Tuesdays that we'll be spending together. So the kind of purpose or objective for today's session was to just start opening up some conversations, spending a little bit of time reflecting and thinking about how we think about our work with teens, what we think those possibilities are, those areas of growth that we've identified, or kind of things we want to focus on or learn about. And then next week when we meet, we're going to be doing, I think we're calling them modules or days, but on day 2, we're going to be starting to think about specifically transition outcomes for youth who are leaving foster care. So that'll be kind of the area that we're going to focus on. And a lot of you brought up some good points about, does it make sense that we're asking, should we be asking young people to kind of in such detail think of their lives in the future? How do we strike that balance between thinking of, forward thinking and thinking of the idea of what they expect or what they want to see happening, and balancing that with kind of our society's expectations for young people, and thinking about how language interferes with that sometimes, or how our own preconceived notions or system barriers, like Nancy brought up some very excellent points of things that, I don't think the policies or the laws were written to make life really, really difficult for your teens in foster care, but that is what the rules do sometimes from a teen's perspective, right? When I've talked to some of the teens that I work with that are in foster care, they're like, when you're a teenager in foster care, you basically, like, everything is against the rules. That's in their perspective. All the things that they kind of see their peers doing, they're hearing is against the rules, or they don't understand the rules or why decisions are made, or kind of the hierarchy of how those decisions are made. And so getting through how we have those conversations, how we open that dialogue, and how we advocate for children who are in those situations. So we will be looking at a little bit of data next week. So if I'm a super nerd, so if you like to nerd out, you'll like next week, because we'll talk about some data. We'll talk about some of the numbers and statistics about transition outcomes for older youth. And then we will be doing an activity together that's called the Letter to a Child. And so those handouts are actually already up if you want to take a gander at them already. You don't need to do them in advance or anything. It's just for your reference. If you want to check out those in advance and kind of help get yourself thinking about next week. Oh yeah, thanks Frankie for sharing that in the chat. I don't know if anyone ever seen in the chat box, but kind of reframing how you explain what a CASA is. Yeah, and I'm a big language person, and the way that we say things and how we say things and how that impacts. If anyone was suspecting on whether or not I was a social worker, it's probably very apparent at this point, as I've spent this much time laboring over the words that we use. but yeah, I think it's, you know, really important and things I never think about. I'm constantly getting called in to the way I've said things. And, you know, it's okay to kind of say, oh, hey, I'd never thought of it that way. I'm going to, you know, reconsider, or think of that from a different perspective. Great. Any final questions, thoughts, anything like that before we sign off for today? Okay. Well, thanks everyone. I hope you have a great rest of your Tuesday and rest of your week. I hope you get to enjoy some sunshine today. And I will see you all next Tuesday at 12. And I'll probably be chatting with you on Google Classroom in the meantime. But thanks everyone.
Thank you, Jen. See you next week.
Bye.